So, Kimberly, obstacle, I'm sure you've gone through a lot of them. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, when I saw the 3 questions, I thought, oh, that's the easiest one to go to first. I could list the obstacles very well. But I do want to just pick up on something Henry said about teaching in the school system, because this is not unique to India. We've heard a lot about how wonderful Canada has and how much it's advanced on these issues. But I want to highlight the fact that in many provinces in Canada, you can engage in a curriculum where sexual orientation and gender identity are discussed as part of the human rights framework. But as a parent, you can remove your child from a classroom where they're actually discussing sexuality. So to understand what those concepts even mean, parents have the right to remove their kids from the classroom and the curriculum when they're discussing those concepts. So it's a bit insane to talk about, in a human rights framework, protections and identities and groups that are protected, but when you're actually talking about what these concepts mean and how you can realize these things as a young person growing up, your parents have the right to remove you from those pieces of the curriculum. So this is a problem that we face, in particular around our communities. So I came up with 3 sort of main challenges. I'm sure there are many more, and there's lots of people in the room that can probably name more, but I've sort of clumped them as the first one being colonial legacies, the second one being extreme medicalization, and the third being fundamentalist thinking. And I'm avoiding targeting religion or religions in particular, but the fundamentalist thinking that goes as part of some of those religions, but not the religion itself. On colonial legacies, and I'll pick up on some of the comments that Senator Sinclair made on the first night, talking about how these legacies in Canada have led to erasure of language, of culture, and I would even go further than what he did and say also erasure of identities. In Canada, two-spirit identities, but in many cultures around the world, legacies, identities that have existed for thousands of years, where there were very fluid forms of gender expression, sexuality, that were attempted to be erased by colonial powers. And not just kind of a process of erasure, but actually, and you'll know this quite well, a legacy of criminalization of those identities. And so even though, and I like to say this kind of as kind of another insane concept, even though many of the countries that were colonized have really pushed away from that, declared independence, that they're on their own path, the one thing that they hold on to is the criminalization of sexual orientation and gender identity. It's held on to even though they've rejected every other sort of legacy of those colonial times. And so this is a huge challenge for us, because how do you engage in human rights education and talk about a population that's still criminalized? Obviously, you're not going to be allowed to go into schools to, and actually talk about populations that are still seen as criminals. But medicalization, so if we're not talking about people seen as criminals, then they're seen as sick. And this is a huge issue still. We're in debates now with the World Health Assembly on how to actually sort of rework some of the definitions around illness associated with trans identities in particular, so that, and this is the other insanity of it, so that there remains a claim to rights, but there also remains an opportunity to get medical assistance when necessary. And it's a hard balance, and it's a very difficult one, but you also don't want to deny people the opportunity to seek medical assistance when they require a kind of diagnosis. And then I guess the third, the fundamentalist thinking, and this is often sort of an interesting mix-up of religion, culture, traditional values, And we see this a lot in our UN work, where even though we're making great progress on issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, there's almost now, it's not polite anymore to actually challenge those. Like in the beginning when we started this work in 2003, countries made no bones about the fact that they would just stand up and say, you don't have an entitlement to these human rights, period. They're more polite about it now, but now what we're seeing is this sort of parallel trajectory of resolutions on protection of the family, traditional values, that absolutely set up this competition between these notions of rights. And all of these three things, these colonial legacies, medicalization, fundamentalist thinking, contribute to a reality that when we talk about universality, that many people don't think that includes us. And so it's great to have this kind of umbrella of universality, but for many of us it's been important to add a layer of specificity to that. And it's been necessary, unfortunately. And one of the big projects that I'll talk about in our next question is the development of these set of principles called the Yogyakarta Principles, which we've worked very hard on. Because you would think that a convention on torture that says no person shall be tortured should include everybody, but it doesn't. A lot of countries don't consider LGBT people, as humans. And so part of the challenge to education for us has been to actually humanize the population, to allow them to kind of become comfortable with the idea that we're actually human beings, and that when we talk about universality of rights, we're part of that equation of universality. So these are some of the challenges that we work with.
Thank you. Huge challenges,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And you're right about fundamentalism and culture, It has been summarized, this debate, as a North-South debate, as a culture debate, which it is not. It's all reasons for not acting.
Well, and in fact, there's a lot of churches from the West, from in particular Canada and the United States, that send people all around the world to educate those countries on how to protect them from the evils of homosexuality, or develop laws, criminalizing laws, when they know they can't get away with that in North America.
They go south.
But they will go and do it elsewhere.
Well, that's very difficult. Thank you very much for that.